Hello, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy, physically and spiritually. As we've done in the last couple of weeks and months, our hearts and minds are with our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. So we're adding tzedakah these days to the usual Torah and Tefillah. Here we're giving tzedakah. Hashem should make miracles. The war should end now, and all the hostages should return healthy. We're going to add today, Ad Mosai. Ad Mosai. Hashem, please have Rachmanis. We're going to start as usual with the Pasuk. This week's Parsha is Parshas Beshalach. It has an unbelievable story of miracles, one of the greatest miracles of all time, the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, and we celebrate it, commemorate it every single day, as we say Oz Yosher and Shachas. Before Oz Yosher, we say Vayesh Hashem, and over there there's a pasuk Vayay Yisrael es Yodak Dela, Asher Os Adinoi b'Mitzrayim, Vayirom es Adinoi, Vayaminu b'Adinoi, Uvemoish Avdoi. It says that the Eden saw the great hand that Hashem performed with Egypt, and they feared, the nation feared Hashem, and they believed in Hashem, and in Moshe, his servant. So there's much to talk about this pasuk, how there's a level of emunah, faith, which goes even deeper than seeing. It's not only seeing is believing, that's a lower level. There's a level of believing which is even higher than seeing, but we're not going to explain it now. And also, Vayaminu b'Hashem uva Moshe Avdoi. Through Moshe Avdoi, our strength, our Vayaminu b'Hashem becomes stronger. And you have to realize also that Vayaminu b'Hashem, Hashem set up a Moshe Avdoi in order to bring us closer to Hashem. And we'll speak today also, Mishim, about a major aspect of Moshe. There's two major aspects really in this Parsha, as we'll soon see. In this week's Parsha, we have something very, very interesting. I'm not going to speak about a specific pasuk this week. We're going to speak about what happens in this week's Parsha in general. And we're going to cover some fundamental themes and concepts which are really connected to man in general and to Yiddishkeit. What's this week's Parsha about? We finally leave Egypt, as we said last week in Parshas Boy, and now we are going towards Sinai, to Mount Torah, but Parai takes to the chase. He's chasing after us. That's the beginning of the Parsha. Then Hashem makes the miracle of Kriyas Yamsuf, and then we have a war with Amalek. So what we have in this week's Parsha is two psychopaths, one called Parai and one called Amalek, the nation of Amalek, and in between them, sandwiched, we have a Nachshon ben Aminadav, Mesiras Nefesh. So this brings straight away our attention to different sort of characters, what we're not meant to learn. In other words, how not to be like Parai, how not to be like Amalek, but to be like Nachshon ben Aminadav. The Rebbe in Likutei Sichos Chelik Aleph asked a question, which I don't really understand the answer so much. He asked a question, how can we see by Parai, Hashem said, Hashem yilachem lechem va'atem tachrishin, Hashem will wage the war, you have to just be silent. And by Parai, by Amalek, we say, tzei hilachem ba'Amalek, we have to wage a war. The Rebbe just doesn't so much elaborate. The Rebbe says that by Parai, really Parai was already behind us. It was one sort of threat. He was chasing after us, but he was behind us. By Amalek, Amalek stands in the way of Har Sinai. In other words, he's really preventing us from moving forward. So therefore, we always have to remember that which is preventing you, and we have to always battle and struggle against that to remember constantly to be able to overcome that challenge. Now, let's first talk about what Chassidus says Mitzrayim is and what Parai is. Then we'll talk about what Chassidus says how and what does it mean that it's not a state of Egypt, that we are free. And then we'll get to Amalek. I hope this all is going to make sense. So first of all, what does Chassidus say? What is Parai? Paroi is oisius oiref. Paroi means the back of the neck, the nape of the neck, which means the space which is between the head and the heart, the mind and the heart, the intellect and the emotions, which means that what is Paroi? Paroi represents, first of all, is getting chayes from acharayim, from the back, and it's the back of the neck, which means, in Avodas Hashem, which means that even though he knows better, and he understands better, but still he doesn't let it come down to his heart. And Paroi is connected to Mitzrayim. And Chassidus says Mitzrayim is connected to Meitzar HaGoroin. Mitzrayim doesn't only mean Egypt, as we spoke many times, but Mitzrayim represents a concept of limitations, constrictions, and Meitzar HaGoroin means the throat, which is connected to the neck. In other words, Chassidus explains that in general, we have the intellect, the world of intellect. Then we have the heart and emotions. Now, in general, there are two different worlds, because the mind is cold, and the main point is the mind is objective, the mind is calm, cool, calm, and collective, as they say. And the heart is passionate, exciting, tumultuous, or whatever how you pronounce that word. So, but we have to work together, which means you meditate, you have to think what's right, what's wrong, is this justified, is this what I'm meant to be doing, is it good, is it bad? And from the meditation, you give birth to the emotions. We'll soon elaborate more on this. But first I just want to get to what the word Mitzrayim means, a Meitzah HaGorim. So Hashem made the human body in such a way that the head is huger than the neck, wider. Then we have a neck, throat, and then we come to the torso. Why? Because that represents how the psychological the order of how we go from the mind to the heart. When you're lost in thought, you're lost in the light, and it's illuminating. It's brilliant. It's huge. The light that you're surrounded with when you're lost in thought. Now you have to turn that down. You have to make a tzimtzum. You have to go away from the euphoria of how you're lost in your mind, in the idea. And now you have to tone it down. And it has to go through a passage, a tunnel, so to speak. It has to go through the neck. It has to go through the throat. Go away from the high, that mental high that you had from being lost in this beautiful idea. You have to tone it down because you have to start making, instead of abstract, you have to make it concrete. To make it concrete, you have to go away from that level of light and say, okay, so what does it mean practically speaking? Enough theory, enough abstract. Let's get to concrete. Practical. What does it mean practical? How do you apply it, as they say? So you have to tone it down. You have to bring it down. You have to dilute the high, the euphoria, and now get down to details, what it means practically, which it's not so high. It doesn't feel such a euphoric feeling. Because now we got to get the details. Now you want to start talking about practical. You know, you have a lot of people, they love the idea, they love the theory, but once we start getting into the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, they just lose their whole, inspiration. So now we have the neck. The problem is, you're meant to go through a neck. You're meant to go through a Meitzah HaGorim. You're meant to go through this constriction, this smalling down, diminishing of the high that you had when you're lost in that intellectual aura. But the problem is, sometimes you can get stuck in that tunnel, you can get trapped in that neck, and it becomes a point where you severed the head from the body. Rachmana litzlan, like they say, cognitive dissonance, which means even though in your head it comes out one way, but nevertheless it didn't come down into the heart. You don't live up to your expectations. You don't live up to the way you're meant to be. And there are many, many hundreds and thousands of levels of this connecting between the head and the heart. Okay, so now in Chassidus, I'm sure you've heard about what's called like one of the main innovations and accomplishments of the Alter Rebbe was Chabad Chassidus. Chabad stands for Chochmah Bina Das, which means the order of how an intellectual process goes from where the illumination, the innovation, creativity, the idea, the light bulb ignites. That's the beginning, like an egg, like a seed. Then it spreads, expands. That's the bina, concept, comprehension, and concentration. That's chochmah bina das. And then that's moyach. The moyach is the brain. The brain has 3 steps in the process, chochmah bina das, and then from that we come to emotions. What does it mean practically speaking? So let's start from the lowest level. In the lowest level, what this means is simple self-control, self-restraint, self-discipline. In the words of Tanya, iskafia, which means a person might have an impulse, he might have negative tendencies, and every single person's born that way. He's born with an animal soul. So therefore, Hashem also gave us a nefesh elikis, a godly soul, which is primarily intellectual, and your nefesh ahamis, your animal soul, is primarily emotional, like the difference between a human and an animal, that a human has a mind. And therefore, just because he has a certain nature, and he has negative tendencies, and he has a lazy side, a lesser self, so to speak, he doesn't have to follow the desire that he feels. For example, imagine you have a dog and the dog is barking. On the lowest level, the brain dominating the heart means we can put a cage over the dog could still keep on barking. You are a person, you have a nefesh ahamis, it's still drawn towards sweets, even though somebody knows it's not healthy for him. And he knows that it's junk food. Nevertheless, he's drawn towards it. What can he do? And it's not his fault. The Eibishter made him that way. So he has that animal which is inside himself, which is drawn towards negative things. But you know what? Just because you're drawn to it doesn't mean you have to follow it. And that means, moyach shalat alalev, the brain dominates the heart. You could control it. Now this is the basis and the lowest level of freedom, and you can say the independence of man, that even though you're in an environment which is negative, even though you're in a society which is negative, and those are challenges from without, and even more so, challenges from within. You have negative impulses, you have destructive desires, etc., etc., etc. Guess what? You also have a moyach shalt alalev, and that control, that idea that you know that this is the wrong thing to do, will control over the heart and not allow it to expand. So that's the first level of Yetzias Mitzrayim, which means that the knowledge in your head that says this is wrong could stop and prevent the heart from taking control. You are in control of your heart instead of being a slave to your emotions. Okay, that's the lowest level. Now this goes on and on, higher and deeper. In Tanya, and this is really also about Judaism, there's another whole level of moyach shalt alalev. Not only that the heart not only that the mind controls the heart in a way of iskafia, as we explained, which means self-control, self-restraint, self-discipline, which iskafia means to suppress the negative, but more so, a more deeper idea of moyach shalt alalev means you could actually create positive emotions. In other words, when we think about Judaism means you are in control of your emotions. And this gives an answer to many, many challenges where someone says, but what do you mean? I don't feel happy. I'm not happy. I have a negative nature. And then we have, and this is on the title page of the Tanya, that the Rebbe speaks about loving Hashem. And this is a general question most people have sooner or later. Like, you know what? Okay, I can understand God asking me to do something. Hashem commanding me to do something. But do I have to be passionate about it? I'm not excited about it. What should I do? I don't feel like it's me. And the same thing is true about Avos Yisrael. Hashem says, love another Jew. How can I love another Jew? The famous question. And the same thing is the question about loving Hashem. And the Mezritcher Maggid asked the question, how is it possible, commandment to love? And the Mezritcher Maggid had two aspects to the question, two parts to the question. Number one, every commandment has to have parameters. It's an instruction. What am I meant to do? I could just snap my finger and create this emotion. If the God Hashem is asking me to do something, put on tefillin, it's clear. Even if I'm not in the mood, I can wrap the tefillin around my arms. Or Hashem says, eat in a sukkah. Even if I'm not interested, I can just put my body, go into the sukkah and eat it. But if Hashem says, love me, what am I meant to do? What's the commandment? And also, how do I come to a feeling? We understand when we say an action, but a feeling means something that I'm attracted to. I don't feel attracted to it. And the first answer that the Rebbe gives for the first 17 chapters of Tanya is Moyach Shalta Alev, which means put your mind in the right place and your heart will follow. Talking about Hashem, what that means, Shema Yisrael, if you meditate, Yisrael, Shema Yisrael over there means Jew meditate, that Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, that Hashem is the only true reality, and that He is giving you life, and He is the master of true infinity, which has no limitations. So then, Ve'ahavta, as the Maggid explained, like Chassidus elaborates, Ve'ahavta doesn't only mean you should love me, which means it's a command, but Ve'ahavta means you will love me. It's a guaranteed result. If you will meditate, Moyach, you put your mind in thinking and meditating to know God, Ve'ahavta, you will automatically come to love Him. So that answers the question. What am I meant to do? Meditate. That's the action of the commandment. And therefore, we see how the emotions are in your control. And the same thing is true about another Jew. If you know what a Jew is, like the Alter Rebbe explains in Lamed Beis, then you'll come to love him. And it goes on and on. In chapter 30, the Alter Rebbe talks about how a person can be humble. And the Chabad approach is to reframe it. If you deeply understand step-by-step process of meditation, then you will actually be humble towards another person. It's not something external. It's not something superficial. It's inside. You go through the brain surgery and you understand. Then you actually feel that way, etc. And now the same thing goes for Yom Tov Shabbos. You can ask the same question. Tonight is Shabbos. Question is, 5 minutes ago was Chol. Now, Lich Pension is in 5 minutes. According to Shulchan Aruch, what does it mean that Shabbos is here? Shabbos is here means I have to act Shabbosdik. But it doesn't only mean act Shabbosdik, it means feel Shabbosdik. What do you mean? 5 minutes ago, I felt mundane. I was emotionally mundane, so to speak. How can I be Shabbosdik on top of the world 5 minutes later? And the same thing is Yom Tov. Moyadim l'simcha. It's a time frame thing. V'samachta b'chagecha. Question. But what do you mean? 5 minutes ago, I had a life full of problems, this, that, and the other thing. How can Hashem command me 5 minutes later? V'samachta b'chagecha. The answer is Moich Shalta Alev. Or you could say, connected to Kabbalah Seil. The Jew is so disciplined that with the power of his mind, since he knows this is what Hashem wants, and he believes in spirituality, there's many different meditations you can have. Therefore, it's a time to be joyous. It's a time to be happy. The fact that I'm going to act happy, who knows what that will generate? That will bring blessings. Whatever the story is, the bottom line is, the commandment is an emotional commandment. And we're saying that you could do it. And it's all connected to Moich Shalta Alev. It's built into Yiddishkeit. So, let's get back to Parai. Parai's problem was the opposite. The Moich was not Shalta Alev. We were in Mitzrayim. He was Oiref. And therefore, even though he knew, so to speak, the powers of Hashem and it was demonstrated, he nevertheless went on the chase, etc. Now let's go to Amalek. Amalek is unique. It says only about Amalek, Acharise Adi Ovid, he has to be destroyed. What makes Amalek different than all the other nations? That concerning all the other nations, it says that when Mashiach will come, this Oz Efech Halamim, they will be transformed and they will serve Hashem. But by Amalek we say, V'acharisei Adi Ovid. They have to be obliterated. Why? So Chassidus explains that every other nation, we're talking about inside in ourselves. Obviously, we mentioned this before, that when we talk about pari, we're talking about our inner pari, which means our inner cognitive dissonance. That's always telling us ourselves, go back to sleep, don't strive for higher, don't aspire for higher, but do what comes easy, what comes lazy, and don't work on yourself. Don't sweat. The same thing as Amalek, but deeper, more obstinate, more stubborn. Why? Because, even though I never saw a Maimah that discusses exactly the difference between Pari and Amalek, because in our Parsha, Pari is destroyed and Mitzrayim is destroyed. Mitzrayim was in a way of Shivira in our Parsha. But Chassidus talks about the difference between Yitzias Mitzrayim, that was the Geula of Mitzrayim, and the Geula of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, that it's going to be more bitter, not Shivira, not through destruction and annihilating the enemy, but through elevating. But anyways, now, Amalek represents a crown, ego without a crown. That's what it says. What does it mean, ego without a crown? The essence of ego without any rationale. In other words, like this, you can have two ways how a person, you tell somebody and you go over to a person, you say, you know what? You see that guy, you should respect him. Why should you respect that person? Why should you revere that person? Why should you honor that person? Because he's greater than you. He's bigger than you. He's smarter than you. But first, the guy could be, let's say, a mechutzef, this other person. But you know what? When you sit him down and he's made a mistake. So then we have enlightenment. We have to show him the mistake that he made. If you show this rich person that this other person is 10 times richer than you, 10 times smarter than you, 10 times more talented than you, 10 times a better person than you, so in the end, most people will come to respect the other person. So that's the usual approach. So even with Pari, let's start at the beginning. He said, who are you coming? Who's coming to redeem the Jews? Who's the Hashem of the Jews? So he doesn't have das. Moshe Rabbeinu represents das, and Moshe Rabbeinu is trying to show him, and this was the 10 Makkos, more and more demonstrations of Gilui, of Shem Havaya, to show who we're dealing with. Which is one of the explanations what it says in general, that the story of Chumash, in other words, Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, is monotheism, that there's a God in general, there's Hashem, could be Shem Elikim, Beresh Bara Elikim, and the story of Yitzias Mitzrayim is to show that it's a whole higher level, Shem Havaya. And for some reason, this still didn't affect Pari, even after 10 times being nuked, he's still running after them. Maybe he thought maybe this time he'll win. But Pari wasn't going on a suicide mission, because that's why he brought all his chariots, that's why he was chasing with all of his empire. He still thought maybe this time Hashem maybe won't make another miracle. Who knows what he thought? We have to understand it really. But Amalek is a different story. Amalek, to start with, is a suicide mission in a way. He knows he's going to be crushed. As the mashal which is brought about the ambatya, the hot steam of bath, he knows it's suicidal to jump into it. He's going to become scorched. I don't care. So it represents an akshonis, a stubbornness, which is a whole level by itself, which means, getting back to the analogy that I said about, you go over to the person who's a mechutzef, who has audacity and no respect, but if you show him that the other person is much greater, usually he'll have respect. That's 99% of the population. But then you have 1% of the population, guess what? The more you tell him how that person's better, and he understands in his head that it's true, that person is a better person in every single way, then he says, you know what? So it shows an even greater chutzpah. I become an even a greater cheveman, that even though that person is truly greater, and I understand it, I still don't respect him. There's a goyish line somewhere, I don't know how it goes, where somebody says he's a rebel. And somebody else asks him, so what are you rebelling against? And he says, what do you got? Which means, that means just anti-establishment be'etzim. Anti-authority be'etzim. That's it, whatever it is. He has to show, I don't care. I don't care. No matter what, I don't care. And that's why Chassidus explains concerning Amalek, that Amalek comes also from the word Am Moloch, a nation of Moloch, Milosh Malika, similar to Pari, where it says that it's the back of the neck. Oiref, by Moloch, it says Amolok. It's a severing. What was Malika? Malika was that act where they broke the neck of the bird in the Beis HaMikdash. It shows an idea of severing the head from the body. That's exactly what Amalek is, even more than Oiref. And that's why it comes after Kriyas Yamsuf. Even after the greatest miracles and every single demonstration you can imagine. And it's not like by Parai, where we have to show them, but wait, there's more, but wait, there's more. No, it's final. We've seen the greatest miracles that could happen, and Amalek is still there and saying, what are you so nispo? What are you getting so excited about? That's why Amalek is also Meloshin Kridus. And that's why Amalek, it says, Yodeyas Rebbeinu. By Parai, it says he didn't reach the level of Das. Amalek, we say, Yodeyas Rebbeinu. He knows God, Hashem. U'machaven limit boy. He's still rebelling. What is he rebelling against? Whatever you got. He's a rebel, l'shem being a rebel. It makes no sense. You can't talk to him, b'chlal. So therefore, enlightenment and illumination is not possible. There's no redemptive angle. He's out there. He's some sort of being which is brains out the window completely, full of a hatred, just because he hates you and he wants to go against you, no matter what. I don't care, whatever. There's no dealing with him. There's no negotiating with him. That is Amalek. So what is the common denominator between the two? Whether it's Parai, whether it's Amalek, it's about stopping the person and the connection between the mind and the heart. Now let's go to Nachshon ben Aminadav, which is the contrast. What is Nachshon ben Aminadav? Mesiras Nefesh. Hashem says, do, we do. Now Mesiras Nefesh is also connected to the mind, but not the idea of intellect so much as we spoke till now, but as the Alter Rebbe brings in chapter 13, there is in the Moyach a special illumination of the Nefesh Halikis, a residing of the Nefesh Halikis of the godly soul, and that means a dedication and a loyalty of Hashem, which goes beyond intellect. It's just that in the body, that the portal of where that resides in the body is in the head. But it's Mesiras Nefesh. So now let's talk about in Avodas Hashem, what does this all mean? You know, we have our inner Parai, we have our inner Amalek, which, you know, just says, I don't care, or just is stubborn, or just has chutzpah, or just Amalek is krirus, asher korcha baderech, which means coldness, relax, take it easy, don't get so excited. Now many people, you know, that Judaism is relaxed. That's connected to Amalek, because it says, don't get excited. So it comes out. Oh, by the way, I mentioned previously about Vayaminu B'Hashem uva Moshe Avdoi. There's a long talk in Chassidus how Moshe says to Yeshua, choose mention, B'chal Lanu Anoshim, and it means Anshe Moshe. People that are connected to the tzaddik. The tzaddik is the full-on level of Kedusha with the full intensity. When you are connected to the tzaddik, his level of devotion, dedication, and fiery passion will help you, and you will also become infused with a bit of that, just like in the story of Amalek, as the Mishnah says, that when he picked up his hands, and the Yidden saw, what does it mean? That they looked at Moshe and his hands were raised? That means he turned them to Hashem. He is the conduit. He connects us to Hashem. It's getting late, so let's just get to the tachlis. What does it mean in Avodas Hashem? In Avodas Hashem, it means that how do we battle the Parai and the Amalek that's in us, which represents laziness, which represents stubbornness, which represents anything which is preventing us from doing what we're meant to do. So there's two ways. One is Das. Moshe represents Das. What does it mean to get real Das? Das means we have to always work on itself, and this is a lifelong Avodah in Avodas Hashem, which means that you have to really immerse yourself, that it should resonate. You know, we serve the Eibishter. When we're under Bar Mitzvah, so we're not so serious yet. We become Bar Mitzvah, we become more serious, and, you know, we start thinking about value systems. How much does it really mean to me? And this is now a journey in life of spirituality and advancement in getting stronger and stronger in our values. But how strong are they? How much are they really part of you? And this is what it means, das. Das means that you work on yourself always more and more, that whatever you're doing, whether it's putting on tefillin, whether it's your Avos Yisrael, whether it's whatever it is, that it becomes like part of you, and therefore you're like vibrating, like it says in today's Ayim Yom, as daven and lenen dafim tabren kol atzmoisai termarna. When the person who is really going through with das, that means it becomes animated from the level of das in his brain through concentration. He reaches a level of connection that then once he hits that, it hits the spot on that level of connection, that he becomes united with it, then he starts really living it and experiencing it. And then it's not possible for anything to get in the way. That's who he is. So one way is through das, and the other way is through bittul kabbalah sale, which means sometimes you can't get into a debate. Sometimes you can't get into an argument back and forth. Because like we said before, when we talk about the Amalek especially, it's not about that. He's there for one purpose and one purpose only. If you're going to debate him, that's part of his success. He stopped you doing what you're meant to be doing. He wants to distract you. It's one big distraction. That's all he has in mind, is to distract you and to stop you at all costs. And when you're talking with him, it's a waste of time. And meanwhile, he's distracting you and stopped you from what you're meant to be doing. So when it comes to such a thing, we have to always try to work on both of these areas. Working on ourselves, not only in a level of chokhmah and bina, I know I'm not explaining it 100%, but das. Like the Alter Rebbe explains, Yitke machshavtei bechayzik. Whatever you're doing in Yiddishkeit, whatever you're doing in learning or in davening or in mitzvah, try to immerse yourself. It should be an immersive experience. And the more it's an immersive experience, the more it will become part of you in a way which becomes inseparable to a certain degree. And the other thing is practicing Kabbalah Sale, having in mind like Mesiras Nefesh. Nachshon Aminadav knew. Hashem told him, go, 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 jump. He does it. A person who lives with Shulchan Aruch, lives with this in mind, there is Ratzon Hashem. I have to know just what Ratzon Hashem is, and then I have to be a soldier, carry out what the will of Hashem is. And if he lives with such an attitude, with such an approach, then he will succeed in doing what the Eibishter wants. Just to finish off with one story, which is a very famous story, and has to be thought about, and which proves to how far this idea of brain and heart is from the essentials of Chassidus. So we have to understand, I mean, there's a simple level, like we said before. On the most basic level, self-control is not only Chassidus, that's basic. Without the idea of self-control, self-restraint, and self-discipline, there's no justice, there's no law and order, there's no Yiddishkeit, obviously. But then there's Chassidus that takes this further and further. So everyone knows the famous story that the Rebbe Rashab went to see a famous doctor, a professor, in 1903. And when this professor, he asked him, what is Chassidus? What kind of discipline is this? I'm just going to read you from the Likutei Diburim. The Rebbe Rashab answered, the letter from Chassidus is that the Kopf muss geben zu verstehen die Herz, was man darf wollen, und die Herz darf bringen in Leben, das was die Kopf versteht. The Rebbe Rashab answered, the mind has to explain to the heart what you should want, what your desires should be, and the heart has to bring into actuality, into life, to live in accordance to what the mind understands. So then the professor asked, wie macht man das? How do we accomplish that? Kopf und Herz sind doch zwei Weltteilen, was zwischen sie ist a großer Yam. They're two separate worlds. And there's a big ocean which separates them. Hat der Tate geämpft, die Arbeit ist auf zu machen a Brick zwischen die dosige zwei Teilen Welt. The work is to make a bridge between these two different worlds, different part of the world. oder lechol apoches durchziehen Telefon und elektrische Drotten, behelfen als die Lichtigkeit vom Kopf soll kommen in den Herzen. You should make a bridge, and at the very least make telephone wires, electrical wires, in a way that the light, the illumination of the head, should arrive into the heart. So obviously, this is the Rebbe Rashab explaining to this professor, what is Chassidus? And this is what he says of him. This is Chassidus. He doesn't say Chassidus is bittul. He doesn't say Chassidus is Kabbalah Seil. He doesn't say Chassidus is Mesidus Nefesh. Even though it could be included in what he's saying over here. So this is something, we have Afachba, the Kulaba. He's answering a professor, what is Chassidus? And he's saying, in the end of the day, Chassidus, his definition over here, is to bring the illumination of the mind into the heart. And that this is an awesome avodah. Hashem should help that we should deal with the pare which is in us, and the amalek which is in us, and eradicate them. And we should all be successful in having noble aspirations, and that these noble aspirations should come into actuality. We should all be successful in accomplishing everything we want to accomplish in our service of Hashem, and through our success in Avodas Hashem, it will bring about the Gula Mitzvah Shlema Mashiach now. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.